I'm Judy Stiles. Thank you for joining us this week on Newsmakers. Well, many families in today's world face challenges when an older family member becomes ill or faces health challenges, and they're turning to where do I go for help? Well, today we're going to discuss that issue of senior issues and aging. Joining me, we have Kelly Hook, Shanna Johnson, and Christopher Dumm. Thank you all three for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
And it seems to be, we pick up the paper, we pick up magazines, there seems to be a more increased awareness today of concerns for senior issues. Would you agree with that today?
Absolutely, yes. You're seeing it all over the news that costs are rising and people are wondering what in the world to do with mom, and we're increasingly seeing a generation that is sandwiched in between aging parents and then younger kids that are still at home in need of care as well.
And do you see this as an increasing concern, because we hear about the aging baby boomers, that it's not going to stop anytime soon?
Yes, I mean, I think that, I've been doing probably estate planning for over 20 years, and the new question in estate planning is no longer what happens when I die. It's what if I don't die and I become mentally incapacitated or physically incapacitated for a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Your assets could be decimated before you even get to die.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of people, generations have worked hard, they've saved money, and then they face that crisis of that situation. What do we do now?
Right.
So we're talking about health issues, family issues, financial issues, even that end of life when it comes to, how do we end things as well. So a lot of things tying together. I guess we're talking with people who are living longer, I guess basically today. That's one of the key situations.
Absolutely. And I think from Shanna's perspective, if you could explain a little more about hospice, because now it's not so much an end of life, and I think people may misunderstand that or need some more education on.
Right. Yeah, we hear the term, people think, oh, that comes in at the very end.
Exactly.
So what do we mean when we
Absolutely. We're not ready to give up. That's what we generally hear. But you're exactly right. We're falling into situations where people are living longer, however, they're not being proactive in making their own decisions when they can. And so we really push, and I know these guys do as well, on making your own choices before you get in that crisis situation. So when someone becomes hospice appropriate and we hear well, we're not ready, we don't want to give up. I spend most of my day every day explaining the benefit and that it's about living and not dying. And there's such a huge realm of patients that are appropriate for hospice that don't actually even realize it or understand it, because to them you have to be actively dying, you have to be very in stage, and it's not that way. I think it used to be at one point, and so it's a stigma and it's a myth that they kind of hang on to. So when we talk to families, we say you may not be ready for what is happening with your body, but you can be prepared, and we can help you with that. So
it sounds like a lot of this is family conversations.
Absolutely.
Getting people to talk.
Yes.
It's not unusual for, in my law office, to have not just mom or dad, but the entire family around the conference room table of how are we going to meet this challenge? How are we going? Who's going to be in control? Who's going to receive benefits? And who's going to get our stuff? When are they going to get our stuff? And how are we going to pay for this?
Right.
And do you find that there are a lot of resources out there people may not be aware of? They hear of things, but they don't realize about it until they need it. You hear about the estate planning or living wills and trusts, all these terms that people throw out there. And what are these things, they say?
Well, I try to encourage people to plan, and that's the one word. If there's one word for probably this session, it's plan ahead, because you want to plan while you have time and while you have money, because you have options.
Right.
If you wait till you're out of time and you're out of money, you're running out of options. Right. So I think from a legal standpoint, the most important documents that a family can have is a power of attorney, where you are taking control of what would happen if you lost control. I want this person to be in control of my health care. I want this person to be in control of my finances. And so you are controlling when you might be out of control.
I've got an interesting story related to that. I had a situation, these documents are absolutely critical, because actually once you reach the age of 18, your parents can't make decisions for you.
So the young people need to be concerned
about this as well. They need to be concerned about this as well. And I actually had a little lady who outlived her power of attorney and didn't take the opportunity or to go ahead and assign somebody new. And when it came to the point of her wanting to make some decisions, she was too frail to really make it on her own, and she had no family to help her through that process. And I feel like that she went through some things that she didn't necessarily want to go through, and it's because not only she had tried to prepare, but then she hadn't updated things. And so you not only do you have to prepare in advance, but you have to keep things up to date. And I know Chris is very good about working with people annually to update everything and keep it updated.
So once you have a document signed, it doesn't mean it's there forever. You need to go back and check it.
Sure. I mean, life happens. You know, there are life events that happen. People happen. You know, sometimes you may not live at the same place. Your accounts may not be at the same bank. Your bank may not be named the same bank. So you'll want to. It's not just a destination. Good planning, you know, is a process.
Kelly, you mentioned, I guess, the young side of things, you know, so we're talking about adults of legal age, of any age, need to think about, you know, what to protect for
I
yourself.
mean, it's just, you know, you go off to college and you're not thinking about things, but you go off to college and you get in a car accident and you cannot make your own decisions. Somebody needs to be empowered to make those decisions for you. And it better be somebody that you like, and maybe somebody who has your best interest at heart, you know, to make those kind of decisions. We also see a lot of times power of attorneys move out of state, and they might be in New York, and mom
Our
is
mobile society, people are moving
in
around.
Carthage, and maybe they haven't seen mom in a year or two, and they're not real tuned into what the issues have been. And so really looking at your power of attorney and making sure that there's somebody local, I think, if at all possible, that you can trust, and again, that you're updating those things. We ran into somebody several weeks ago that they were in their 90s and they had not updated their will or anything since back in, I think, the 50s. So they had written the first one, put it away, and that was it.
The laws may have changed in 60 years.
Right, 60 years.
Just a bit.
As well as the family members changing.
Right.
So we're talking beyond, you know, the old days people say, oh, I have a will I'm taken care of. We're thinking about a lot more things today than just a will.
Sure,
Absolutely.
sure.
Absolutely. And I know for us, we try to be real proactive when somebody, even if they're not appropriate or ready to come on our service, we guide them in that direction, and we notarize their papers, and we really encourage everybody, no matter the age, to get that in place, because you're right. When you wait until there's a crisis and there are so many family dynamics and nobody wants to be that decision maker, especially when there's more than one, then they all sit there and go, we don't know, we don't want to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, and so empowering people to make those choices and continue to update those is really important.
And in making those choices, you can state what type of treatment you want, for instance, you know, if you're dealing with medical treatment and so forth.
Absolutely.
Shanna, do you find that a lot of people that come on service, you're having to get those documents done for them?
Yes.
So you'd say a great percentage?
I would
was
say
curious.
probably close to half.
Wow.
So people are coming in unprepared, basically,
Well,
and when they face
absolutely.
those situations.
And we're seeing, we're seeing an age of an increasing dementia and Alzheimer's diagnoses, and they're at a point a lot of time that they can't consciously make that appointment that
so
they
once
would be
that
able to.
diagnosis is made, it's too late to say I'm going to have this
Right.
type of paperwork signed,
Right.
and tying that together. And you mentioned long-term care insurance, and brings up the topic of, you know, someone no longer can stay in their home, and somebody has medical challenges. I think back to the elderly parents, for instance. You know, at what point do you work with families to try to? Is it best to keep someone in their home if they're having medical challenges? You know, what types of things are we looking at in today's world?
Well, I definitely have an opinion on that. And probably Shanna does as well. I think our day and age, especially with the baby boomers who are coming up, people want to stay home. They want to be in their home as long as possible. I know I would like to be. I would like that for my parents. So planning is definitely important, because with all the options there are available nowadays with private duty home care, with hospice, with home health, there is the ability to stay at home when certain preparations have been made.
Right.
And therefore, when you're looking at maybe having to go to a nursing home, it might just be for a short stint in rehab or that type of thing to grow stronger so that they can come home. My grandma used to say, it's either death or the nursing home, and it's not that way anymore.
You have too many options now. You can look at the ways to help people.
Absolutely.
You're right, and there is a time and a place for everybody, and a preference for everybody. And I've had patients and family members in the nursing homes that have loved it there and have thrived and loved the socialization.
Right.
Most people would prefer to stay home, and there weren't always programs in place for them to allow them to do that. And they still don't even really realize now all the resources that are there. And so, we're advocates of make an informed decision, gather all the facts, know what your options are, and be able to do what you feel is best for your situation.
So how do they gather those facts or find out the options? Are there
Talk,
resources
talk,
online? Talk to people? I mean, what do you recommend for just, what do I do when they say, where do I
Right.
find things?
I know myself personally, we have, Comfort Care has a website, we have a Facebook page. I'm constantly trying to post articles about aging. Chris, you have a website, you guys have a website. There's all kinds of information. It's almost information overload. If people can actually go to those websites and educate themselves a little bit, but also all of us, I know, try to do instruction locally, different events where we'll talk about senior issues, and really trying to get people to increase awareness. I think that a lot of times, unfortunately, people don't want to approach this topic until it's happening to them.
Right.
And that's where we end up getting the frantic phone calls. And I feel so bad for people because they are in crisis mode, and we all know you don't make great decisions in crisis mode.
Right. There needs to be communication. The communication, mom and dad don't typically want to talk about it. The kids don't want to hear it. We don't want to talk about the mortality of our parents.
Right.
But we need to have that communication. We need to talk about what if this? How do we pay for that? And parents need to communicate to their family who wants to do typically what mom and dad want.
Right.
If there hasn't been any communication, they're guessing. And most families, there are certain things where the parents see things differently than the kids.
Yes.
So we need to have that communication
You need to be able to
say,
understand that, right?
I'd like to stay at home as long as possible. I have some clients that say, I don't want to be, none of my clients want to be burdened to their kids.
Right.
That's almost
It's
a
universal statement.
a universal statement. But some clients, they really want to stay at home. They also have, AARP did this study where they polled the World War II generation, and they said, what's your number one estate planning goal? And like 90% of them said, I want to pass an inheritance to my kids. They asked the baby boomers, their kids, what do you think your parents' number one goal should be? And 90% of them almost said, or almost 90% of them said, we want them to take good care of themselves. Like 10%, or a really low percentage, said, we want an inheritance.
So different perspective on passing
Yeah.
on to the next generation.
And that plays out in my conference room all the time, where mom and dad are like, well, we want to eat, rice and pork and beans at home so we can send an inheritance to your kids. And the kids are saying, no, we want you to live a little bit. We don't need an inheritance. And so that we need to have that communication.
So people need to discuss those things that used to be kind of a taboo. Don't ask how much they make, don't mention how much they have.
Right.
Everybody strives for quality of life, and that's what we want for our loved ones, and that's what most people want for themselves. And we, in a resource aspect, we rely heavily on our medical professional community. We rely on the doctors to be having these conversations. We rely on the hospital social workers and discharge planners and hospitalists to be having these conversations, so that they're not flying back and forth to the ER and getting a little worse every time and then saying, now what do we do? Now we don't have any choices. So that's one thing that we advocate for really early on in a disease process is, what do you want? How are we going to get you there? Let's make these decisions and start getting, that's when they get those resources in place, when people start talking. And it's getting better, but it's still, there's still not enough information because of the busyness and the specialized treatment and care that everybody's getting. It's a little more difficult to get that one person that's going to say, here are your choices, here are your options. Let's look at them and see what's best for you.
And do you find that with our society, you mentioned people moving and so forth, sometimes it's hard to even have the family in town to talk to.
Yes.
Or, you may have one, but not all the siblings. So how do you get that consensus of people talking together?
I do a lot of conference calls.
Conference calls, Skype. I probably shouldn't say this on TV. I have met with people over holidays and over weekends. if that's what
If they
it
come in to
takes.
visit, they're
That's
going to
right.
visit with
And,
you.
we even try to do educational things sometimes, like on the Friday after Thanksgiving, we usually have an educational workshop that we do in our office for our clients, because we know families coming in, and after they've had a huge turkey dinner the night or the day before, what more do they want to talk about than the mortality of their parents? And so this is a great opportunity to educate families.
And when you're talking about those legal considerations, sometimes you talk about the older generation wants to pass things on. World War II generation concerned about things like inheritance taxes, and the government's not. I hear older people say, "I don't want the government taking everything." Do they come to you and say, "What can I do to make sure it stays within the family?"
Without a doubt, saving taxes is like always one of the top 3 goals of I think every client I've ever met with. It is easier now to save on estate taxes because it only affects probably less than 1% of Americans right now. So there's about 1,500 estates nationwide that have an estate tax issue. I mean, you have to have an estate in excess of $5 to $10 million before you even have to worry about it. Now that covers most of us.
Right.
The people that it doesn't cover, that is a great problem to have.
So looking at those different aspects, so there's a lot of different considerations, and paying for things as well. You talk about care, somebody gets into that situation where they're saying, well, how can I pay for daily care? Just what are those options, making them aware of those costs?
Well, and I think educating people on what Medicare covers, because Medicare, most of the time they think Medicare is going to cover everything.
If I get sick, the government's going to take care of me.
Long-term care and whatnot. Now, hospice is a Medicare covered service completely. And home health is a Medicare covered service. Private duty home care would be covered in a different way, whether it's by private pay, long-term care insurance, or there's a veterans aid and attendance benefit that some people can apply for. And that's where Chris can really help people out, because he can help them figure out how to pay for
what
home
do I
care.
have that will help qualify for
Right.
this? Yeah.
Right. And so, if you're going to see an estate planning attorney about these long-term issues, some of the things that you should talk to them about is, what is what do you own? What are the sources of income? What are the medical expenses that you are incurring or might incur in the future, and running through that. I think a good example sometimes to start the conversation, if some of the baby boomers are watching, with mom and dad is, to prep them that, that car that you bought new a number of years ago that you paid $3,000 for, that same new car now is $30,000. Right. And the nursing home, when great grandma was in the nursing home and it was $30 a day, it's a lot more than that now. And to get people understanding that this can be a real issue.
So really putting in perspective what's happening in today's world.
Right, and the fact that people are living longer, so the days of people, having the big coronary at the age of 65 or 70, there's a lot of treatments for that now, and people are living longer. And what I tell people all the time, I see, and my parents even, I've seen wonderful planning for the funeral. They've got their stone, they've got their plot, they have got their service planned out, they've got the funeral package bought. But for maybe the 10 years in between where they start getting sickly or have something major happen, and the time that they pass away, perhaps they haven't planned so well. There's some gaps in the plan. Yeah.
Shanna, you mentioned when people are diagnosed with certain diseases or illnesses, sometimes those are long-term stretching, whether it's Alzheimer's, dementia, or some of the different types of things we hear about. So
absolutely, people don't typically consider hospice when it's a chronic disease such as COPD and CHF and those things that we see a lot of, not realizing that they may be appropriate to receive the benefit. And you talk financially, a lot of times when I go in and talk with families and we tell them everything we do, covering equipment and supplies and medications, and they have a nurse and they have an aide and they have a social worker and they have chaplain and we have volunteers and we have all these wonderful volunteer programs, and they say, we can't afford that. But it is fully covered it is a Medicare benefit that's fully covered. And when you look at government expenses, there have been studies that will show that we actually save the government money when somebody uses the hospice benefit. And so we spend a lot of time on that mindset, even with some physicians and those that kind of think it's a double dipping government costs, but it's covered under Medicare, Medicaid, VA, private insurance, all of those things. So
a lot of that's just the awareness of people
It
not knowing,
is.
I don't have that much in my savings account, I can't pay for those things,
Right,
so you let them know that we have
Right.
these services provided for you,
Right,
and tying
right.
them all together. Talking about the people who care for the ill, or the parents, whether or caregivers, people might say, well, they've got the sandwich generation. I'm taking care of mom now, or taking care of dad now. That type of stress is seeing a lot more in today's society as well.
Absolutely. Caregiver stress is huge. And I just had a recent experience with my own mother. She had a heart attack recently, actually in March, and had no blockages in her arteries at all when they did the heart cath. The doctor figured out that it was actually a stress heart attack that was brought on by her blood pressure shooting through the roof, clamping down those vessels around her heart muscle, and caused damage. She had elevated blood tests for the cardiac enzymes and everything, and the doctor told her that it was stress induced. My mom is a young 72, but she is caregiver for my dad, who is also 72 but has multiple medical issues that are pretty serious. And so my mom, living with him, seemed to be handling everything really well, but has had now a heart attack that's set her back, really in part because of the care she's given to my
stress
dad.
of her taking care of him,
to my
right.
dad. So I think caregiver stress, especially in a generation as where you've got young kids and you've got elder parents, and we're such a fast-moving society. We all have jobs, and they're busy. We have busy lives. So I found myself here. I own a home care company, looking at mom and saying, "You need to get some help in here, so that you're not so stressed out," and really having to monitor my mom more for caregiver stress. It's out there, and it's really it's rampant.
So you see this in a lot of families, that the kids may be
Absolutely.
seeing the stress on the parents who are trying to take care of each other. And working.
absolutely.
Yeah, and
Yes.
sometimes you won't see that until there's like a holiday dinner.
Yes.
You don't realize how dad has progressed
Right.
and how stressed out mom is. And the other thing is that the healthy spouse feels guilty,
Yes.
feels like it's their duty,
Yes.
and it's going to kill them before the unwell spouse dies. And and I have grabbed people's hands in the conference room and said, "Listen, if you don't get help, you're going to die,
Right.
and before they do, and that's not going to help them. So let's get some help. You still stay at home. We've got options, but let's make some decisions to get some help."
Do you find sometimes that is a generational thing, that maybe the older generation we've never had to ask for help, we're
That's right.
independent.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We,
Sure.
we may go visit the neighbors, but we're not going to go out and say, "Please help me."
We're fine on our own. We've always been fine on our own. We'll get through this on our own, and it's a pride. I mean, they're proud of that. But when it comes down to it, you have to give them a scenario. Okay, you're taking care of your husband who has dementia, and if something happens to you, what's going to happen to him? Well, he would have to go to a nursing home. Is that what you want to happen to him? Well, no, we want to stay home together. Well, then, in order to make that happen, let's get some help involved, and let's give you more of a quality of life so that you can spend time with your loved one instead of always being in these caregiving tasks that overwhelm a lot of people. Not everybody wants to be a nurse. I love being a nurse, but not everybody wants to be a nurse.
Caregivers sometimes are afraid just to even leave the house because of taking
yeah.
care of someone. So it changes their
And so
lifestyle.
they forget to be family.
Right.
Now they put the family hat in the closet because they're caregiver. Well, we can hire caregivers. You can go back to being family.
Exactly.
And that's, I would say, the one thing that people, after someone passes away, if they haven't had a real good plan and they've been trying to do everything, especially the ones that don't have hospice, that's their biggest regret. They never took the time to reminisce over the pictures. They didn't take the time to just sit and talk. And now it's too late, and they can't pull back that time anymore. And so if they can let people come in and just partner with them, not take away their responsibilities, but just give them some support and some help and some encouragement along the way, the whole experience, it may be a bad experience, but it's better. I don't know.
They
Shannon,
leave it with a better feeling at the end.
Yes. It's
They do.
more-
They get to be family, like Chris said. They get to be family, and we have a lot of people that are in a clinical field. We have nurses that it's their parents, and they say, I don't want to be their nurse. I just want to be their daughter. You know, and coming in as an outside resource, kind of all that pressure of getting all those decisions made fall back to where it's an objective thing, and they don't feel so pressured to say, I don't want to feel guilty because I'm going to let somebody else come in the door here. They're hearing us saying, you've got to have some help, or you're not going to have any decisions to be made. You're not going to have any choices.
So as we said at the beginning, really a lot of it is making people aware of what resources are available, what their options are, and I guess picking up the phone and calling anyone such as the three of you and ask, what do I do?
Yes.
Yes.
We
Surf
love
the
it when,
web.
yeah, and we love it when people ask questions. I spend a lot of my time on the phone, I know, just talking to families, and they come into the office just asking questions, and so we're here to help.
We're all people advocates.
Yes.
Working together with the help of the people. And Chris, from the legal side of people having their paperwork in order, if someone who's watching and says, well, I don't even have a will, would you recommend somebody at least do that to start off with getting things going?
Yeah, I think, seek first information. And so, what should you have? Should you have a will or a trust? Maybe you really need to start out with a power of attorney first, because you can only die once,
Right.
but you can become disabled more than once, and making sure you control that situation as best you can.
And these are papers that are available, legal papers that are available that can have access to through attorneys'
Absolutely.
offices or
Sure.
the state and
Even
so
online,
forth, and get those
Sure.
online to fill out. So they don't understand, ask someone, how do I fill out this durable power of attorney?
Well, and the power of attorney is pretty inexpensive to have done, but it is very expensive if you don't have that done and you actually were to need one. I don't know what the dollars amount on that, but if you have to go for guardianship or somebody has to do conservatorship because you don't have a power of attorney, that can get really super expensive.
Adding on to those costs.
Yeah.
So your advice would be to, whether someone has an older parent or just a spouse, is have that, as I said, the talk.
Have the talk.
Absolutely.
Sure.
And become aware of what's happening. So a lot of resources in our community. You're representing 3 areas of senior issues and senior care. But people just look around the community, surf the web, pick up the phone book if they still have that, to find out what is out there. And word of mouth, is that a good way to find out what's happening?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a good, people that you trust in your circle of trusted advisors, ask them, who would you see for this, for service or for that service?
So sharing that information. Well, as I said at the beginning, this is a big topic. We can go on and on with different specific issues, but I wanted to kind of create an awareness today, as we said, letting people know this is an issue that we're going to face more and more as the community continues, society continues to age.
Yes.
And tying that together. Well, I'd like to thank the 3 of you for being here today.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you. I'd like to thank the viewers for being here as well. I'm Judy Stiles. Hope you can join me again next week at the same time on this station. We'll see you then.